Hello, it's Craig here. A few days ago I wrote an opinion piece in TradeWinds which got a few people commenting and getting in touch with me. I wrote about fatigue and how when I was at sea, even at the start of my career in the 1980s, it was a problem, particularly on the coastal ships that I worked on. And it seems it's still a problem today. I wrote my opinion piece just after the North Sea disaster when a coastal container ship, the Solong, ploughed at almost full speed into the anchored tanker Stena Immaculate, which was partially laden with Jet A1 aviation fuel. One Filipino seafarer unfortunately died, and the British authorities say that they have charged the Solong's master for manslaughter, and it appears that he was on the bridge of the container ship at the time of the accident. We don't know for a fact that fatigue played a role in the master not noticing the tanker looming large in the fog and on the radar, but the experts that I've spoken to or messaged me have said that it is a strong suspicion. So, in this special edition of Green Seas podcast from TradeWinds, I'm digging deeper into the issue of fatigue and what the answers may be.
This week's episode is brought to you with the support of Bureau Veritas.
At Bureau Veritas, each and every one of us is by your side to help you navigate your decarbonisation journey and shape a better maritime world.
Now, when I sailed around the UK coast, it was on various coastal tankers carrying products from the oil refineries such as Fawley, Grangemouth and Milford Haven. I was mostly the second mate on the ship and there was only a few people on board. So few, in fact, that we had to work 6 on 6 off most of the time on the bridge watches. And also we were going in and out of port nearly all the time, so we were often called out on mooring or standby duties, even when we should have been otherwise in our bunks trying to sleep. And I largely mean trying to sleep, because sleep on a small, rattling, vibrating, weather-impacted tanker is never long, nor is it deep. Exhaustion was common. Fatigue was there, but never called for what it was. Instead of talking about it, it was kind of expected that we were man enough to deal with it. And this was all, of course, before the Maritime Labour Convention and all that was supposed to be addressed. After my article, I was in touch with Captain Jim Staples. Captain Staples has 30 years at sea, 20 of which as master, so his experience far outweighs my small decade. More importantly, he's also worked quite heavily as an accident investigator in the US and been heading up navigating assessment courses in the States to help navigating officers, that's the captains, chief officers, second mates, third mates, understand their shortcomings in navigation rules and technology. The problem, he said, is that seafarers are not only exhausted, that they're also fiddling their rest and work hour reporting.
We have a major problem with rest periods here too. And even though, with the smaller ships that you're running the coastwise all the time, the thing there is you're probably on an adrenaline high, 99% of the day, because you're on the go all the time and you're in traffic and you're in bad weather. And it's a fast-paced environment where deep sea, we only have that problem when we come coastwise. But the problem with the big ships too is that you could be on the coast for a week and a half, and then your adrenaline's the same as everybody else's. And it's like you're on a washing machine, and the call-outs are the same, and the cargo operations and all that stuff. And by the time you leave port, you are absolutely worn out. Yeah, and you're fatigued. The other problem that we have too is, with fatigue, it's not just the guys on the ship; it's the whole industry as a whole. We've got to look at the IMO. We've got to look at the Coast Guard allowing these safe manning standards, as so they call it, which they aren't. We all know that as mariners. We know that this is not safe manning, that we definitely need a few more people so that we can always have somebody on the bridge who has been rested, or as well as rested can be, so long as you haven't been in a horrific storm or running fog all night with the whistle going and all that kind of good stuff. That's a big problem. And that needs to be looked at. But the problem herein lies with the IMO and all the regulatory bodies that are out there. They're the ones that can not solve this problem, but can definitely lighten this problem up to where we're running a safer environment. So we all know that a lot of these guys on the ships are gun decking their rest period logs and all that kind of stuff, because nobody wants to be out of compliance, because they don't want Port State to come down and give you a hard time. Because you're not within compliance, your rest periods, right? And it's very difficult for a captain to say, well, I need rest periods. I need to stay alongside the dock another 12 hours. That just doesn't happen. because the port will throw you out. What we find is with a lot of the younger captains that don't have a lot of the experience, they're going to do what they have to do to keep the ship running, which means violations of procedures and policies and laws. So we see that happening a lot.
And therein lies one of the biggest problems. The record books, even when accurate, may not tell the whole story, whether an individual seafarer is fatigued or not. Another accident and human factor expert is Nippin Anand. He's author of the book, Are We Learning from Accidents?
One of the big problems with work and rest hours is becoming sucked into this narrative that you can actually measure all of that. Well, the first thing is that the idea of work and rest hours was never meant to measure fatigue. We've got it totally wrong. The whole idea of work and rest hours is an ILO requirement, is to give people the right to get sufficient rest. It's an issue of right. It's not an issue of health. It's an issue of right. So what are we really measuring here? We don't even know what we are measuring. That's one. The second thing is we need to take, and I'm not suggesting that we should just garbage the whole idea of measuring. Of course, there is some merit in there, but we need to balance measurement with some qualitative understanding of what good quality sleep means. What is good quality sleep for seafarers? And we need to work with that. And I think that awareness needs to come as the foundation for understanding what causes fatigue. Because today we have all sort of issues. Some of them you highlighted are very, very real issues. We're not even getting into distraction and Facebook and all of that stuff. Let's just keep that stuff aside. There are some real issues like you highlighted. There are series of port calls you have to make. You are jet lagged by the time you come from home to join the ship. You are working with different time zones. People sometimes don't even get appetite when they have to move from one time zone to another.
Now, there's some new research come out of the World Maritime University. It's from Captain Dr. Bikram Bhatti. And this research backs up Captain Staples and Nippin Anand's fears. Bhatti recently completed his PhD thesis on fatigue, which involved interviewing over 6,000 seafarers, about 55 port state control officers, and looking at over 16,500 port state inspection reports. In his paper, which was published recently, he noted that over 64% of seafarers admit to falsifying work rest records, with more than half being told to falsify their records by either a superior on board or from a company's head office. In short, he wrote, the structures supporting implementation of work rest regulations are broken. A further problem that Captain Staples has identified in his work in the US is that deck officers often fail to understand how to use the bridge technology while still being fatigued, and this, of course, compounds all the risks.
I do some training at the Maritime Institute, which we do a program called NSAP, Navigational Skills Assessment Program, which Shell Oil has put every one of their participant companies involved with the captains and chief mates and even second and third officers through. And what it is it's a 2 to 3 day program where we do an assessment, very much like the airline does, where they'll put somebody in the cockpit and run them through scenarios. And so we do the same thing with ship masters and stuff here. And we find it's a very, very valuable program because what we get to see is the limitations of the knowledge of some of these mariners that we have out there and their misunderstandings of rules or the equipment that they're using. But what we find out is that mariners have, number one, we find the biggest problem with them is their lack of a true understanding of navigational call regs, the rules of the road. The other thing we like to look at is how they set their equipment up, which all plays in a part with what just happened here the last couple of days, right? So, and along with the rest periods and all that kind of good stuff.
Technology firms have, of course, developed bridge solutions for shipping companies to focus on ensuring voyages are efficient and that bridge and engine room systems have led to a reduction in ship's crew, particularly in the days of Captain Staples' time at sea.
They all say that, the downsizing of the vessels came along because of the automation and all the technology that was added to these ships, that we no longer needed to have all these people, which is true. When I started, we had 42 to 46 people on board a ship, and then when I left, I was down to maybe 20 on ships that are bigger, faster, carry more cargo, in port less time, and which is all good and great. But the problem is, all that good stuff is bad stuff for the mariner, because now he doesn't get any rest. And then to make life better, they go ahead and put an internet on, the ship. So now when you get off a watch, how many guys are going down to their room and sitting there and getting on the computer and dealing with the fatigue, the problems at home, the stress at home, watching movies or whatever they're doing. And now look at the lack of sleep that they're getting. I do a lot of work with NYK. And one of the things that I was told is that as the internet was getting better on the ships, the suicide rate was going up, which was an interesting thing. So just because we're getting all this great technology and stuff doesn't mean that it's making life easier for the sailor.
So what can we do about fatigue? Well, the issue of fatigue is soon to be addressed in a tripartite meeting in April that brings together the International Labour Organization, the IMO and the industry to discuss the Maritime Labour Convention. Representatives will meet to discuss ongoing issues such as fatigue, harassment and criminalisation, with a view to potentially amending the Maritime Labour Convention and encouraging shipping companies and maritime states to address those issues head-on. Although in Captain Staples' mind, the simplest solution is just to increase manning levels.
I think some of the things that we have to do is definitely make it so the chief mate is definitely just a day worker. He's not a watchstander. Who's ever handling the cargo and the safety of the vessel like that should be a day worker. And the 3 watchstanders should be their primary job. They're 3 watchstanders. And if one of them is behind in his hours, now you've got somebody that may be able to fill in, stand a couple-hour watch while this guy's getting some extra sleep. But the companies don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about more manpower.
And Nippin Anand believes the Maritime Labour Convention needs an overhaul to include a better way to define sleep and fatigue, to get a definition or work on quality sleep, not just recording of work and rest times.
Once you set targets and goals for people, that does not include talking to people, trying to listen to them. They will demonize people and they will not feel anything wrong with it because it's not their job anymore, as you rightly said. It's not my job. My job is to meet my KPIs. And I think somewhere in this KPI obsession, we need to help people understand that you're not doing yourself justice and you're not doing justice to people just by turning everything into numbers.
So back to the investigation of the Solong and the Stena Immaculate disaster. Of course, the investigation is going to be looking at the root causes, and as many suggest, it may be an accident caused by an exhausted man at the wheel. But the discussions have also got to lead to what happens next. Additionally, there are other factors that need to be looked into. Captain Staples said questions need to be asked about what was happening on the Stena Immaculate, such as that they never noticed the approaching ship and took no action. Then there are questions also about why a vessel was sailing regularly through an anchorage where in fact other tankers were also anchored at the time of the incident. Were there also navigation constraints forcing the route that the vessel took? And were there arrival demands by the port of Rotterdam and elsewhere where the Solong was heading? Many accidents have multiple factors that lead up to the disaster, and this may be the case here. But one hopes it will stir the regulators to examine once more seafarer fatigue and come up with a solution that is more than another regulation and another performance metric for tired seafarers to follow. This is the Green Seas Podcast. My name's Craig Eason. I'm the technology editor. Please feel free to get in touch with me. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.